Let's bust some myths today, shall we? Dehydrating food is easy, but when you get started, it can be a little daunting because you hear stories from this person to this person to this book to this website to this guru to this YouTube channel. But there are a lot of things out there that are myths, and as your dehydrating BFF, I want to make sure that you understand the ins and outs of dehydrating and what myths are ready to be busted so that you have more success at dehydrating the food for your family. Okay, to get us started, I'm going to go with a big one up front so that you get that first and foremost. The myth is that dehydrated foods always taste like fresh when you rehydrate them. That is a myth. Now, it doesn't mean they taste awful, but what you need to do is lower your expectations a little bit that the food that you dehydrate is going to be just like it was when you had it fresh. Because it changes the texture, just like canning does, just like freezing does, just like anything that you do to preserve, sometimes the texture changes a little bit and it will not come back as fresh. So when you dehydrate an onion, when you rehydrate it, it's going to be soft. It's not going to be crunchy like it was fresh. Same thing with green beans. They are going to be better as an ingredient in a meal rather than a side dish on their own. So don't set yourself up for a failure that way. Dehydrate your food and learn to use it as an ingredient in dishes that you make already, not as a side dish by themselves. So myth number 2, dehydrated foods last forever. They don't. But here's the deal, they can last a long time. Now, optimally, we're going to use that word, optimally, most dehydrated foods last for about 2 years, according to the National Center for Home Food Preservation. You're going to have some foods that are the heavier, starchier vegetables that will last a very long time, and you might get 3 or 4 years out of them. You have some foods that are like tomatoes and fruit that might not get to a 2-year mark. After a year or so, you may start to see a decline in the quality of that food. So here's the deal, it's like a Best By date. We're going to tell you it's good for about 2 years. You may get more, you may get less. As you hit that peak, as it starts to decline, you start losing texture and flavor qualities. You may start losing nutrients. It doesn't mean that that food has gotten bad. It just means that the quality may not be as good. But just don't think it lasts forever. I know they found that food in the tombs in Egypt when they pulled out a pharaoh. That was totally different circumstances than probably what you're going to have in your home. But know that drying your food, it's going to last a while. Rotate it often so that you don't have to worry, and you're going to be great. All right, here's another big one. I mean, most of these are all going to be pretty big ones. You can dehydrate anything. If you hear a cat in the background, we've adopted a new kitty. There he is. This is our new cat buddy. He's having a little bit of a hard time adjusting to being inside kitty because we adopted him from outside. So he may be quite vocal now that I'm talking. He likes to talk with me. All right, so the next myth, you can dehydrate anything. Technically, yes, you can, but doesn't mean that everything is always good to dehydrate. Now, I have a list of the things that you should not dehydrate down in the description box below and the whys behind it, because there are some scientific reasons why you shouldn't do it, but then you can make the choices whether or not to do it at home yourself. But the reason being is that some things shouldn't be dehydrated because they have too much fat in them. And it's not that the dehydrating process is unsafe. It means that the fat content in that food, once it's dried, can lend itself to rancidity, which is that weird flavor and smell that you'll get from things like flour that's gone bad or oil that's gone bad. That's fat in that content that turns it weird, and it's not good to eat, which is why it's recommended for those foods that you put them in the freezer when you've done with it until you need it for a short-term event, like maybe you're going hiking, backpacking, camping, or you want to use it in a meal in a jar that you're going to have at work the next week or two. Those are fine to use those higher fat foods there, but store them in the freezer to keep them good. You have other foods that aren't good to dehydrate because they're just going to taste bad. Avocados are the big ones, okay? Just don't bother. You're going to waste a perfectly good avocado. So check that resource that I give you below. It's going to talk about eggs, meat, cheese, avocados, and milk, and why we recommend not dehydrating them. Then you can make those choices about what you want to do at home. And by the way, have I even introduced myself yet? I'm Darcy from the Purposeful Pantry, where we talk about dehydrating and other methods of preservation to put food on the shelf for your family for whatever needs that you have. Okay, another really big myth that people say, and this comes especially from competitors to dehydrating, I'm not going to name anybody, but it happens, is that dehydrated food loses all of its nutrition, and that's absolutely a myth. Here's the deal. Remember, I'm your dehydrating BFF. I'm going to tell you the truth. Dehydrated foods will lose vitamins A and C with prolonged heat exposure. So you can know that when you're dehydrating your oranges and limes and lemons, you're not doing it to store the vitamin C, especially if you keep that heat up to get them dry faster. You're going to lose those vitamins, but they keep all of the other vitamins that are available to them, all of the nutrients, the antioxidants, all of that stuff they keep. They just don't keep the vitamin A and C because those are heat sensitive. Now, if you blanch things, the water-soluble vitamins like B's, and there are a few others that I don't remember offhand, will get lost in blanching, but you're still saving other ones. And sometimes with blanching, you're making other nutrients more readily available to your body than if you didn't blanch them, which is why we have a recommended blanching list of the things that you should blanch and the things that you don't need to. Then you have the issue of if you take any of these foods, whether you freeze them, you freeze dry them, or you dehydrate them, you're going to lose all those same nutrients in the cooking process anyway. So when you're doing any foods and you want to keep all of the nutrients available that you possibly can, dry everything under 115F 46C. That helps keep the nutrients, it helps keep all of the vitamins and minerals. It also helps keep the things like ferments going because it keeps it down in heat where it doesn't affect it. If you're really interested in keeping all the nutrition possible, dry low, and know that it's going to take longer to dry than any of the books recommend. And speaking of what books recommend, another myth that's out there is that all books and manuals are always right all of the time. And I'm going to tell you, there are some manuals out there that are telling you that your dehydrated foods will only last for 2 weeks, and that is absolutely false. But another thing is that the times are always going to be something that isn't necessarily replicable in your house, reproducible in your house. The other thing about those manuals, some are trustworthy, like major brands like Excalibur. Those manuals are trustworthy, but there are some brands out there that are created that people make the manuals that don't know what they're talking about. And sometimes those manuals are wrong, and they're so wrong. So what I generally say is read your manual how to use your machine, then toss it and learn how to dehydrate the right way. Now, this tip is for somebody who may be diabetic or looking at a low-carb diet and really trying to watch the sugars. The myth is that dehydrated foods have fewer calories, and that's absolutely false. The thing is that when you're drying food, you're only removing the water content. You're not removing the sugars or the carbs or any of that. So the general rule for serving sizes is 1 cup of fresh equals 1/4 cup of dried equals 1 tablespoon of powdered. But the calorie count and the carb count amongst all of those measurements are exactly the same. They're just done in more concentrated forms. So that can lead people to think that there are more calories in dehydrated foods. There aren't. It's just that you need to remember the serving sizes that you're using. So that 1/4 cup of food that you're eating has the same calorie count as the cup that you might have eaten fresh. So you really need to pay attention to that if you're on a restricted diet. Now, for those of you who aren't, just remember that when you're trying to serve in, like you're trying to decide how much you're going to use for a meal, that 1/4 cup back to fresh is how you would do that ratio. All right, another myth or a mistaken thing that I think that people have about dehydrating and storing is that when you put an oxygen absorber into a Mylar bag and seal it, that it is supposed to look like vacuum seal bags, that it's supposed to suck all in, that it will look like wrinkle and stuff, but it's not going to. It's not necessarily going to. I'm going to say that. Now, you can vacuum seal Mylar bags if you have specific ones that have a ribbing on the inside of it. There's one particular brand that does that. There's also quite a few YouTube videos out there on a hack that you can do to vacuum seal Mylar bags. I'll leave a link down to one of them below, but there are a lot of them out there. I don't know the original person who did it, so I can't make sure that I'm giving them the full credit. But you can also do a search on YouTube for vacuum seal Mylar bag hack, and you'll find quite a few of them. But what's actually happening with that is that when you put an oxygen absorber inside your Mylar bag and you heat seal it closed, that oxygen absorber is only pulling out the oxygen out of the bag, not all of the rest of those elements that make up air. So you're still going to have that fluffiness there. You may see some vacuum sealing effect where you're going to see it shrink a little bit, but if it doesn't shrink all the way up and get all shrivelly, don't worry, it's working. It's just not working like if you vacuum sealed a plastic bag. Because I get a lot of people that say, it didn't work, I ruined it. No, you didn't, you're good. Everybody says mandolins are horrible and they're awful and they're going to cut your fingers off. And that myth is right. It's not a myth. But the thing is that when people get their fingers cut off, it's because they're not protecting their fingers. You need to use a cutting glove that is meant for meat cutting, that they use in butchers, in restaurants. It's a chainmail type of material. It's not really chainmail, but it looks like it, that will protect your hands from the blade. Don't use those cloth ones, because I'm telling you, the cloth ones will take that fabric out, and then you do risk cutting your finger on top of it as well. But I see too many people showing images of what they look like at the ER, getting their fingers fixed when they used a mandolin without a glove. And I'm going to tell you, I don't even use the guard that comes with the mandolin. I only use the glove. But if you're using that guard and you tend to be prone to messing things up like I do, even with that guard, your hands are going to be slippery and wet from having in all of that food. And as you're using it, you get a little bit of resistance and your hand's going to slip. Use the cutting glove. I'm telling you, it will protect you always from getting cut. Mandolins are probably one of my favorite tools to use to cut my food, but I know how to keep safe, and I will always use that glove. I'm telling you, do not use it without one. And so now I want you to watch this video that are tips on how to dehydrate successfully, because I want you to preserve all you can preserve for your family. And until I see you again next time, happy dehydrating and keep preserving. I think I did okay. We're good.